So welcome back, audience, to Creative Thinkers. My name is Miguel Valenzuela, and today we have a special guest, Dr. Miguel Juarez. I want to thank him for coming to our show. Today we're going to talk about a lot of creative ideas and concepts, right?
Right. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. So we want to always start off our show by learning a little bit about our guests. Can you tell us if you're from El Paso, where are you from? Are you originally an El Pasoan? What has your career been? Give us a little bit of insight on that.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in El Paso. We lived in Segundo Barrio when I was little. And then when I was 10, we moved to Hacienda Heights, the Hacienda Heights area, across from present-day Valle Verde campus.
Very nice.
And we moved there when Valle Verde was a cow pasture.
Oh my gosh.
And which was many years ago. And then we saw the creation of Valle Verde, and it was exciting that they were building a community college right there in our backyard. I graduated from Bel Air High School. I attended UTEP. I was at UTEP for a number of years because I wanted to major in everything. Of course, you couldn't major in everything.
Right.
They make sure you major
there
in
something. There are some limits, right?
Some limits. So I majored in liberal arts. I took journalism courses. I majored in liberal arts, but I graduated with 60 hours of art, of fine art. And then I took creative writing. I took synthesizer music. I always gravitated towards the arts because they were natural.
In which respect were they natural for you? As a child, you mean?
They were natural because, you know, my mother has told me, or my late mother told me, as soon as I could hold a pencil, I was drawing. But the problem in our household is we were poor and we didn't have drawing paper. So I would draw on the back of black and white photographs because that's the only white paper we had in the house.
Okay.
So I would, so all the black and white photographs that we have in our family have little drawings in the back. And
courtesy of yourself.
And that was me drawing at the age of 1 or 2 or whatever. As soon as I could hold a pencil, more like 2 years old.
Was that something that was encouraged in your household?
No, actually, I don't know. My mother at one time took up photography, and but that was really not. No, they were upset that I was drawing on the back of photographs, but that's the only white paper we had in the house. It was not encouraged. Where it was encouraged at school. My teachers.
In which way?
Very supportive. They were supportive in that they provided drawing paper, and it was always to enter competitions. But I always placed second. I never got first. Well, anyway.
It's all okay, right?
But in school, our teachers were very supportive. Back then, in Segundo Barrio, the schools that I attended, Roosevelt School and Eoy School, where we had a lot of teachers that were very caring. I felt they were very caring. And I was always kind of like I was a real kind of sociable kid. I loved my teachers. And a couple times I was teacher's pet, you know. I wanted to.
Nice.
I wanted to, to work with a teacher and so forth. And I was very sociable in my classes. Since a child, I've been very sociable. And later on, I learned that that's Malcolm Gladwell in his book writes about connectors.
Right.
I'm a connector. I was a connector since being a child in grade school all the way to present day. And connectors are people who know a lot of people, who don't have any trouble speaking to anyone from any background, can talk to anyone about anything. And so we developed this network. And I remember as a child, in the 4th grade, I came home like the first day of school, and in my notebook I had 10 numbers. I had numbers of the 10 people that I wanted to stay in touch with.
In grade school?
In grade school, but the only problem is that we didn't have a phone.
Right.
So I don't know why I had their numbers. So
literally no phone at home.
No phone at home.
But you knew you had to make these connections.
Yes, I needed to make those connections, and I carried those numbers with me, just in case, you know.
So let me ask you a question. Do you believe that there is some level of creativity connected to people like yourself, connectors?
Yes, of course, because we see connections. We see who's connected to who, what are the patterns. We can kind of read people in terms of whether that person likes this or that, and I think children develop that early on, but back then it was really not encouraged. We didn't have gifted and talented courses.
Right.
I remember being at UTEP one year, and my fourth grade teacher runs up to me. I guess she was taking courses for her education courses.
Right.
She runs up to me and she tells me, "Oh, Miguel, I'm sorry we did not have GT classes back then, but you would have been in it." So it's like, thank you for telling me that. So,
But you still accomplished a lot of
yes,
things.
well, as a young child, I remember I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be this and that, but I just didn't know how. I mean, my parents were basically from Mexico.
Right.
They did not speak English, and many times we would be translators for them, because we're in school and we're learning English and so forth. And so, but my father was a very creative, my parents were very creative, resourceful people who took a little and made it a lot. In terms, like, my father was very interested and involved in gardening and
Right.
in doing lawn work, and he was very skilled. My mother also made fantastic meals out of really nothing,
Right.
because we didn't have that much money. And they were very resourceful people and always pushed us to finish our education. That was a requirement. We had to finish our education. And thank God, when we moved from Segundo Barrio to Hacienda Heights, a lot of the counselors were astounded
Because?
because they were astounded because we weren't unruly kind of troublemaker kids.
That might have been like a stereotype of
That
some
might have
sort.
been a stereotype.
Right.
And we took school seriously because our parents took it seriously, and they wanted to make sure that we got the education that they never had.
So they understood the concept and the
They
value
understood the
behind
concept
education.
and the value behind it, and all of us graduated from high school. In high school, it was really interesting. I got involved with the Key Club.
Right.
The Key Club was a social service organization.
Mm-hmm.
We were linked with the Downtown Kiwanis Club.
Oh, nice.
We would go to have lunch with the Downtown Kiwanis Association. And I remember one time they all sat us down and they showed us how to hold a fork.
Oh, really?
And how to hold how to put the napkin and what this fork was for, and the soup spoon and all that, because we didn't know that. We didn't grow up middle class, and so we would do projects. They would sponsor us to do different projects. Like, I remember always service projects, more like global projects.
In which respect?
I
What do you mean?
remember one time we went to go plant trees in the Gila National Forest.
Oh, really?
And that's for globalization, for issues of global warming. Even back then, it was apparent. And so we camped out for a week in a tent.
Very
and we
nice.
were there, kids from, Beller High School, planting trees, learning how to plant trees.
Which is something different.
Right, which is something totally different.
So now tell us a little bit, since we're talking about the subject of being out of town, tell us a little bit about your travels, why you think it's important for people to get out.
Well, I think it's important. A lot of young people, they can't wait to get out of El Paso.
Right.
But unfortunately, a lot of them never come back. What I've been able to do in my life is I've been able to leave and then come back.
What's the advantage of leaving?
The advantage of leaving is that you
Not
see,
permanently,
no,
but leaving.
is that you see many things out there that you can come and bring back. I remember I was attending school in Los Angeles, and I got to experience Day of the Dead in Los Angeles, how the artists celebrated, and it was beautiful.
Which was nothing that you had even experienced in
I
El
had
Paso.
not even experienced that in El Paso, so I came back and I started organizing exhibits with artists, and so they could do their interpretation of Day of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
And we had artists like David Nakabayashi, who did a beautiful, He's, I think, Japanese and Mexican American. He did a beautiful altar in the middle of the room at the chamizal. There was actually another artist, David Fleet, who did an altar made of dresses, and so these were very. And there was even an architect.
What did he do, or she?
He did he did a exterior altar out in the grounds of the chamizal, and unfortunately he blew away.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway,
But it was the intention.
it was the intention. So I worked with the artist community, and we were doing all that way before the city celebrated Dia de los Muertos.
Yes, we actually just went to the Dia de los Muertos parade and festivities.
It was
Beautiful.
way before that, looking at spaces. Like I remember Ricardo Sanchez, the writer, had died, and I invited his family to do an altar
For him?
And they took the whole entire back wall. They recreated like his living room, and they had photographs, and they had his clothing. It was very emotional. He had the entire back wall, and so I was kind of like the curator, but at the same time the coordinator, and letting people do what they wanted to do, not dictating. And I think that was back in the early '90s. I was teaching at the Tec de Monterrey and
in Juarez.
In Ciudad Juarez, and I invited my students to do an altar, and they did.
In Juarez?
No, in El Paso.
Really?
So they did an altar, and it was very, Mexican students at the time could really do, because they would celebrate it, unlike us that were barely beginning.
Coming into that, right?
Yes. And so going other places and seeing what artists and writers and what happens in other places. Like, I'll give you an example. We have relatives in Kentucky, and my sister went to visit them around autumn one time, and she saw how people put pumpkins on their front yard. And it's like here, we put the Christmas lights and the luminarias. That's very standard. Well, in Kentucky, on the lawns, they put pumpkins.
Lit pumpkins, I assume.
No, natural pumpkins, like a display of different size pumpkins and all that.
Wow,
Well, she
that's
came
nice.
back. Well, she lives here, but she came back, and in her front yard, she created kind of one of the first pumpkins.
Like a pumpkin patch.
Like a pumpkin patch, yes. I mean, we don't see a pumpkin patch in people's homes, right?
No,
but
not
you
at
need
all.
a yard, and she said she collected pumpkins for the entire year. So, well, or including
months,
months and all that, so she could create. And so she saw that in Kentucky, which is very natural there. And here she created the same thing, and she did a real beautiful pumpkin patch.
Which is a great example of how seeing creative ideas in other places and bring them here can flourish into something bigger.
Right.
So I see that you've brought us a very nice example of a print. Can you tell us a little bit about this one? Because I see number 76 on it.
Number 76.
What does that mean?
This was an edition, 6-screen print of 76. It was printed at the Art in Vivo printmaking series that was a proper print shop.
Downtown El Paso.
Downtown El Paso. And it was shot in 1976.
The photograph.
At Kiss's first El Paso concert at the County Coliseum. And I took my camera in, and with Tri-X film, analog, it wasn't digital film, and I pushed it to 1400, and I took various photographs. And I've had these negatives since then. And a friend of mine said, "Can I borrow them so I could Photoshop them, and maybe you could do a print or whatever?" And this was the result. So I have a whole. And actually, I want to say I don't really produce art often, but when I do, I try and do something like this. But I also write about it. In back of it, there's a write-up. There's a write-up in Fusion magazine. I publish in Fusion magazine every now and then because I'm a writer, but I publish and I just put it out, and it's online so people can read it. And I publish in a kind of non-academic way, and just so people read it. So this is the story behind my adventure of taking pictures at the Kiss concert. Here's another photograph, And this was published on Fusion Magazine. It's, if you look for it, people will find it. But so it was a really interesting time because I took up photography. I was in the cafeteria one day, and all the friends I hung up with, they said, "Oh, they're starting a photography class," and I go, "What?"
I'm signing up.
I'm signing up. I'm taking it. So we took it, and we were the photographers for the yearbook staff and the annual staff, and it was a great time. We learned how to from this professor, Dr. Or Mr. Klamborowski, who has since passed away. From him, we learned how to process film, and it's to see the first time you see. If you've ever had that experience of putting it in the developer and then seeing the image pop up.
I have. I've been lucky enough to see that. Yes, it is like
it's
magic.
magic. And so they started my lifelong interest and support and, of working with photography.
So I find something very interesting that you just mentioned about photography itself. You had stated that your father or your mother had taken a class, so maybe there's a slight influence there to a certain degree. But then that sparked something more interesting in you in wanting to come back and actually start creating more photographs.
Right.
Going out and being part of something bigger, which is the yearbook.
Right.
Which brings us to your nice book that we see over here. Talk to us a little bit about this.
This was a book. I had two mentors in my life who suggested that I start documenting the murals because no one had ever done that before. And then they suggested I team up with a photographer. I teamed up with Cynthia Weber Farah. And so it took us 8 years to produce this book.
Wow.
But we started going to different communities. And, well, we started in Segundo Barrio and taking the photographs there. And then people would ask us, "What are you doing?" And we'd say, "Well, we're documenting the murals." And then they'd say, "Oh, there's some over there in another neighborhood." So the community told us where to go. And then we'd be in that neighborhood and they'd say, "Oh, my cousin did one over here." So it was a very organic process. There was no map. We had only like 20 slides. And Cynthia took the photographs and I interviewed the people. And when it came down to writing it, she says, "Well, you do the text and I'll do the photographs." And I said, "Okay." And I was a bit hesitant in the beginning because, Cynthia was a junior leaguer and I was like a poor Chicano,
Right.
It was going to be...
But it was a nice mix.
No, but...
even though you were hesitant.
No, but it was a real good mix. And the people who suggested we work together was Cesar Caballero, who used to be the director of the library at UTEP, and the late Martha Arat, who was a big supporter of mine, and she was an artist, and she did beautiful work, and unfortunately she passed, but she was a big supporter of the arts, a big behind-the-scenes person, and but she's no longer with us. And she herself was a very well-known artist and a benefactor to many artists. She helped many artists as well.
Really?
Yes. And so those two people kept saying, "No, you got to work with her. You got to work with Cynthia Farah." And so I did, and we created. And now it's time for another version of this because it's been 30 years since that book was out, and people have been asking for another version. So hopefully, I've been taking steps in
bringing something together.
Yeah, bring something together because there's so much more. There are so many artists. It's like there's the whole generation of artists who are in this book. And this is interesting because it's not only, it's a listing of over 200 murals that were in El Paso in 1997, including photographs, and it's a bilingual edition. But
it's in 2 languages?
Yes, it's in 2 languages, but
Beautiful.
also more importantly, it has an introduction, a foreword by the late Jose Antonio Burciaga,
Right.
who was a very gifted writer. He was one of the original founders of the original Culture Clash. He used to be an El Pasoan. His family lived in a Jewish synagogue on Mesa, or on the west side, that burned down. He went to El Paso High. But Jose Antonio Burciaga left. And he and his wife wound up at Stanford, and they founded Casa Zapata, which was a cultural center. And each time that he would come to El Paso, he would leave parts of his archive. So Jose Antonio Burciaga's archive and drawings, he was an artist as well, and his writing maybe drafts of some of his manuscripts are at the special collections. But then
At UTEP.
At UTEP. But
Right.
then recently also the writer Chacon at UTEP and someone else did a book, because there's a bigger archive of his work, and I'm not too sure where that collection is, of Jose Antonio Burciaga. He was a very prolific writer, artist, involved in culture and so forth. But he's someone who left and kind of never came back. He would come back and visit,
Right.
and do presentations and so forth, just like Carlos Morton. Carlos Morton is a playwright at University of California, Santa Barbara. He's very well known. He's done hundreds of plays, and he's from the Bel Air area. I think his mother lives used to live close to Bel Air High School. And he, another gifted person from El Paso. El Paso has had its share of very gifted writers, poets, and so forth. And a lot of them leave and they just don't come back. They come back to visit during the holidays, but
Right.
they come to visit their families, but they don't come back to live. They've kind of gone. They're out in the world doing, but I think a lot of them write about El Paso. They write about El Paso.
Yes, because there's a huge connection,
Right.
a huge love
Right,
for El
right,
Paso.
right.
That's absolutely true. So what are you doing today? What are you doing now as far as teaching is concerned? What do you teach?
Well, I teach history both at El Paso Community College and at UTEP. I teach the history survey courses. And in teaching U.S. history, I incorporate a lot of local history. I incorporate also some of the, say, singers, like when we're talking about I incorporate like the Sioux Tutors, and I explain to them why Sioux Tutors dress the way they did. And then I also incorporate some of the music of the period. And it's interesting. The students have never heard any of this, because you don't really get, now there's a move towards incorporating ethnic studies in high schools but there has historically not been that move, and so now hopefully it will change. Students will know more of the culture, but why should they have to wait until they get to the university to hear about these stories? Including in my teaching. Like, I remember one semester at community college, I do this both at community college and at UTEP. I show the 1972 video shot by Jesus Trevino, who also his family lived in El Paso.
Right.
He's a filmmaker now living in Los Angeles, very prolific. And Jesus Trevino did a video of the 1972 Raza Unida convention that was held in El Paso, Texas, at the County Coliseum.
So it was huge.
It was huge. This was a national convention to try and establish a third political party.
Oh, really?
As an alternative to the Democratic and Republican parties. So when they were trying to figure out where they were going to have it, they said, we want to have it somewhere in the middle. It wasn't going to be in South Texas. It wasn't going to be in Los Angeles. So where's the middle? El Paso.
Right. Perfect
And
place.
In 2012, we decided to have a 40th year commemoration, and we had 4 days of commemorating that convention. And so El Paso has been historic, is historic for many reasons, but people don't know this history, or the people who lived through it don't know how to
Forward the information.
forward the information. And part of it is you need to write it down. Someone told me if it's not written down, it never existed, right? I mean, but that's not necessarily true.
Or if painting it,
Or
making
painting
a work
it,
of art.
painting it.
Yes.
That's why we have such things like oral history. You can interview someone and they'll mention it, and it'll be their own personal oral history. And it's kind of like the show. You're getting people's oral history, but creative oral history, in just in a half hour, and it gives you insight to their process, to their thought process, and also their background, and so many things. And so, and I think many people are creative. Many people are creative thinkers, and unfortunately, creativity has been pegged to only artists and writers and people who create paintings and so forth. No, I think a lot of people are creative. It's like when you're cooking and you're missing an ingredient and you add something else, how do you solve that problem? You get creative, right?
Absolutely, very
you
true.
You get creative when you're maybe writing or something and you want to say something. Well, how do you get creative? So a lot of people are creative, but it's almost like they need to not think that it's only the purview of the artists and the writers. I think everyone's creative.
And I think that the reason for this show, I think, is to help people understand how important creativity is, because it's part of everybody. It's just that I feel like for a great portion of the general public, we have been taught to not be creative,
Right,
and in some way that keeps us from doing a lot of things.
Right. I remember being, I also have done substitute teaching. I remember I substitute taught once at a school where there was a very, very gifted individual there. This person was so gifted he could mimic the intercom. Dr. Juarez, we need you at the office or whatever. And he was brilliant. I mean, you would think it was the intercom, but they had already warned me about him, so I knew that he was going to do that. This person would have been great in theater. He was theatrical, but he was one of these kids that teachers got tired of because
Right.
he was always, causing trouble or whatever. And his name was John, and I had always thought, is there somewhere that I could help him? Maybe give him we need it for him to get to have
next
a
level, right?
scholarship or something. And unfortunately, he didn't make it. He didn't make it. He's still around today. He's probably married with 2 or 3 kids. I don't know. I haven't seen him in a number of years. I lost track with him, but he would have been great on stage. I mean, he had it. He had that presence.
It's important to push people
It's
in the right
important
direction.
He needed to be pushed, but then I think a lot of people don't know where to push these creative kids towards. I think nowadays, especially if they're seen as troublemakers and so forth, but then you have agencies. There are models out there like Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, and I know that because I was there. Homeboy Industries, they get people who have been in prison, and they work with them. And they have a Homeboy Industries bakery, and they have so many different.
They help them out with their abilities, right?
They help them out, and I don't think we have that here.
Well,
So-
I think maybe it's a good idea
Right.
that we were able to interview you
Right.
because you are one of those people that could help individuals. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
I'm on Facebook, on Twitter as Miguel Juarez, PhD. I'm on LinkedIn. They could reach into LinkedIn. I have a Wix account. I have a page called on academia.edu. And then I also have a lot of articles in the Herald Post online, Fusion Magazine, Latino Rebels, and my email or my handle is at the bottom, so you can get in touch with me. You could also send me an email at either both at mjuarez6@utep.edu or mjuare17@epcc.edu.
Well, thank you very much. I want to extend our thank you for being with us and for allowing us the opportunity to speak with you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So I wanted to thank all of our viewers today for being with us, and I wanted to thank Dr. Juarez for being here. And if anybody needs to get a hold of me in reference to maybe some other people that I might want to interview, you guys can email me at mvalen31@epcc.edu, or you guys can shoot me a text at 512-717-2426. Thank you very much. Join us next time.